JonBenét Ramsey's case once again had new developments in 2025. Recently, John Ramsey appeared in an interview, sharing about a new beginning in the journey to find justice for his daughter. Will there be any breakthrough this time? Today, we will reanalyze this interview to see what new information John Ramsey revealed. First, let's listen to his interview again.
Well, you're right. We've been very frustrated with the leadership in the Boulder Police Department for 28 years. It's been bad, in my judgment, and poor leaders don't build strong, effective organizations, and that was the problem we had. Boulder did bring in a new police chief from the outside, dealt with some problem detectives on it, which was on our case for years, and it's kind of a fresh start. And we had a meeting, and my objective of the meeting was to make sure that they understood the potential value of the latest DNA technology and genealogy research that could be done and has been done to solve some very old cold cases. And I think that's how our case will be solved. So that was my objective of the meeting. And it was a good meeting. I was impressed with the leadership now in the police department, which had to be step one. Without that change, we would still be at square zero. But the leadership I was impressed with. They seem sincere. They want to solve this case, very committed to it. And we had a good discussion on the DNA technology that I think will solve the case, has a good chance of solving the case. So I'm encouraged. Now it's time to give them some time to see what happens.
When the host asked a question about whether the Boulder Police Department uses the method of analyzing small or damaged DNA samples to track down relatives of suspects, John Ramsey quickly gave an answer.
Yes, reading between the lines, I think they are looking at that hard. And we did have a DNA expert with us to make sure we had good information to present. And he was very effective in just talking about what can be done. So whether the police knew that already or not, but at least it got out on the table, we discussed it. And I said, look, I think this is how we'll solve the case. I think it's our best shot. It's the most likely way the case can be solved. You know, we get leads, but we've been getting leads for 28 years. And, you know, they're well-meaning leads, but they haven't produced a result. And that's a very, very primitive way to try to solve a murder, in my opinion. This is the latest and the greatest, and I'm just convinced it'll work.
As I watched this interview, something kept me on edge. A nearly 30-year-old murder mystery, a father who had been adamant about criticizing the Boulder Police Department, and now he was back on television with a completely different attitude. What's really going on here? Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to dive into an interview with John Ramsey, the father of JonBenét Ramsey, the 6-year-old girl who was murdered in her own home in 1996. This wasn't just a murder case. It was one of the most controversial mysteries in American history. During his interview on the Banfield show, John Ramsey brought new information to the case. He talked about the police, about DNA technology, about new hope. But there was a problem. When analyzing John's every word, there are many inconsistencies, illogical arguments, and especially, there are signs that this may just be a media strategy. So the question is, does John Ramsey really want to find his daughter's killer, or is he trying to control public opinion to protect his family's reputation? In this video, I will peel back every detail of the interview, compare it with what has happened over the past nearly 30 years, and help you see this case from a completely different perspective. Before we begin, if you are interested in mysterious cases and sharp analysis like this, don't forget to like so that YouTube can recommend the video to more people, share the video to help more people know about this case, and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the next videos. Now, let's dive into the analysis of this interview. There was something odd about this interview that I couldn't ignore. Something that made me stop and wonder, what is John Ramsey really saying? Does he really believe that the Boulder Police Department has changed? Or is this just an attempt to change his public image? Let's rewind a bit. For nearly 30 years, the Ramsey family has been a vocal critic of the Boulder Police Department. They've said that the police went about the investigation the wrong way from the start, focusing on the family instead of finding the real killer. They've said that the police botched the crime scene. They believe that the investigators were not experienced enough to handle a case as complex as this. John Ramsey himself once called the Boulder Police Department incompetent and accused them of botching the investigation from day one. And now, all of a sudden, he's had a complete about-face? In the interview, John said he met with the new chief, was impressed by their sincerity, and thought it was a fresh start. He believed that this time the police would focus on DNA technology to solve the case. But wait, can a single meeting change everything? If the police have failed for 28 years, can a new chief really make a difference? I don't deny that there can be change within the Boulder Police Department, but it's hard to believe that one meeting could completely change the way things are. What really impressed John Ramsey? Was it because the new chief had a clearer direction for the investigation? Or was John simply trying to calm the public? Think about it this way. For years, the Ramsey family has been criticized for not cooperating fully with the police. When the case first broke, they refused to answer formal questions. They hired lawyers immediately and controlled the media coverage. They did not allow the police to conduct a full investigation into the house. Now, suddenly, John Ramsey is publicly supporting the police. If this really helped solve the case, why didn't he do it in the first place? It may not be a simple change of heart, but a sophisticated media strategy. If John Ramsey publicly supports the police, it makes his family look less suspicious to the public. Imagine, before, the Ramseys were at odds with the police. That made them look like they were trying to hide something. But if they now support the police, they will be seen as desperate parents seeking justice for their child. This may be more a way to clear the Ramseys' name than a real change in the investigation. The question is, if this is not a PR strategy, why hasn't John Ramsey given any specific information about how the police will approach the case this time? Do they have new suspects? Do they have new evidence? Are they committed to a completely different line of investigation? Without that, it's all just empty talk in the media. But there's one strange thing. If John Ramsey really wanted to find the killer, why did he completely ignore other important evidence? Why did he not mention details that could have helped the case along, instead focusing on DNA? Was this really a breakthrough in the investigation, or just a distraction? In the interview, John Ramsey repeatedly emphasized that advanced DNA technology was the key to solving the case. He talked about DNA genealogy, a method that has helped solve many seemingly deadlocked cases. He claimed that this was the most viable way to find the killer. But is that really true? Let's stop for a moment. If you've been following the JonBenét Ramsey case from the beginning, you know that DNA isn't the only thing that matters. What's the problem? DNA can help solve a case, but it's not always the most important piece of evidence. Does the DNA found in this case actually link to the killer? Why did John Ramsey focus so much on DNA and not mention other key pieces of evidence? Now, let's talk about what we actually know about this DNA. One of John Ramsey's main arguments is, if we run a genealogical DNA test, we can find the killer. That sounds reasonable, but there's a big problem. The DNA found in JonBenét's underwear doesn't match anyone in the Ramsey family. Does that mean the family is innocent? Not necessarily. Let's take a closer look. There's no hard evidence that the DNA belongs to the killer. It could simply be DNA contaminated by manufacturing or accidental exposure. What does that mean? If this DNA is just a random trace, it is pointless to use it to find the killer. The Ramseys can use this DNA to prove they are not involved, but it cannot confirm who actually killed JonBenét. So why does John place so much hope in DNA? In his interview, John Ramsey completely ignored other key pieces of evidence. He did not mention the unusually long ransom note, which looked like it had been written by someone in the house. He did not mention the crime scene, which showed clear signs of a setup. He also did not mention the family's unusual behavior immediately after the crime. If John really wanted to solve the case, why didn't he talk about these factors? Is it because DNA is the easiest way to steer the public away from the family? Think about it. If John Ramsey said, "Let's re-examine the scene, let's reanalyze the ransom note, let's reinvestigate who was in the house," he would have inadvertently put the family back in the crosshairs. But if he said, "Let's focus on the DNA, we need to find someone with a DNA match," that would have been a way to steer the investigation outward, removing suspicion from the family. So the big question here is, if DNA doesn't lead to a killer, are the Ramseys willing to look at other evidence? Or do they just want to cling to DNA to overshadow all the other negative factors? And this is what I'm most skeptical about. If tomorrow the Boulder Police Department announces that the DNA sample doesn't belong to the killer, will the Ramseys still want to continue the investigation, or will they find another reason to distract the public? John Ramsey said something that made me stop and think, "We've had thousands of leads for 28 years, but nothing. Thousands of leads over nearly 3 decades, but none of them really helped? Does that seem reasonable?" The question is, where are these leads really coming from? How many of them are coming from the police, and how many are coming from people who want to protect the Ramsey family? Have all the leads been thoroughly investigated? Because if there are thousands of leads and no one can connect them into a logical line of investigation, then either the case is extremely complicated or something is not being properly investigated. Think about the possible scenarios. Some leads come from the police, which is normal in any investigation. But if the police have too much information but can't act on it, then the problem may lie in the way they approach the case. Some other clues come from people who want to protect the Ramsey family, and this is the interesting part. Remember, the Ramseys have a strong team of lawyers and media professionals. They hire private investigators who can filter information to their advantage. These leads may have been designed to divert the investigation rather than provide real information. If a large amount of information comes from sources who want to protect the family, does it actually help the investigation? Or does it just lead the police in the wrong direction? Remember the first days after the murder. Instead of cooperating with the police immediately, what did the Ramseys do? They hired lawyers immediately. They refused to answer formal questions for months. They did not let the police question their son, Burke Ramsey, immediately. If you were an innocent person and your child was murdered, what would you do? A father who really wants to find his daughter's killer would cooperate with the police from day one, right? But the Ramseys seem to want to control information rather than let the police investigate freely. And here's the weird part. If they really wanted to find out the truth, why didn't they agree to let the police investigate more thoroughly? Why didn't they want to be questioned immediately? Why didn't they allow the police to examine the scene more thoroughly? Why do they seem to be controlling the investigation rather than letting the police do their job? Is this why the case remains unsolved despite thousands of leads? If we have thousands of leads but they're not getting anywhere, what does that mean? There are 2 possibilities. One is that the police didn't do their job well. 2 is that there were some important leads that were ignored or not properly considered. If you've made it this far, I'm sure you've been interested in this case for a long time, just like me. It's a controversial case with so many unsolved mysteries. Thank you for being here, listening, and analyzing with me. What I share is based on my personal perspective, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe so we can continue our journey to uncover the truth. And now, let's get back to the next analysis. Think about what we know. The ransom note was unusually long, one of the most important pieces of evidence, but John Ramsey didn't mention it in his interview. There was no sign of forced entry, which would indicate that the killer was probably in the house from the start. The family's behavior that night was strange. Instead of calling the police right away, they called friends and a lawyer first. Are these details forgotten clues? Why didn't John Ramsey mention them? If he really wanted to find the killer, he should have talked about all the possibilities, right? But instead, he focused on DNA and the useless clues that had been collected over the past 28 years. Was he trying to hide something? Think about it. If you were a detective and you had thousands of clues in a case but couldn't solve it, what would you do? You will review the original evidence more closely. You will focus on important elements such as the crime scene, the behavior of witnesses, and questionable testimony. And most importantly, you will not be distracted by useless or possibly manipulated information. But what is John Ramsey doing? He wants people to believe that there is nothing suspicious about his family. He wants people to believe that thousands of clues lead nowhere. He wants to focus all the attention on DNA technology instead of other evidence. And this may be a tactic to control how the public views the case. There is one thing that has been bothering me the whole time I have been watching this interview. John Ramsey comes out and says he wants to find his daughter's killer. He emphasizes DNA technology. He praises the Boulder Police Department. He calls for a reinvestigation. But is that really all he is doing? Or is there another motive behind it? Let's consider three possibilities. 1. This could be an attempt to clear the family's name. 2. John Ramsey is pressuring the police to investigate in his favor. 3. He is trying to steer the public opinion, to obscure the suspicions surrounding the Ramsey family. We cannot forget one fact. The Ramsey family has always been the focus of suspicion. From the very first days after JonBenét was murdered, the police suspected something was wrong. What made them suspicious? There was no sign of forced entry. If this was a kidnapping or murder from outside, why were there no signs of an intruder? The ransom note was unusually long, over 2 pages, and written in a style that made it seem more like a kidnapping than a murder. The family's strange behavior, instead of calling the police immediately, they called friends and a lawyer first. Now, 28 years later, John Ramsey wants to publicly show that he is trying to help solve the case. Is this a way to burnish his image? If the public believes that John Ramsey is still fighting to find the killer, it might help his family get past the old suspicions. The big question here is, if John really wanted to find justice for his daughter, why did he wait nearly 30 years to do it? Why not cooperate fully with the police from the beginning? Why hire a lawyer and control the information so soon after the crime happened? Clearing his name may be one of the main reasons John Ramsey is on TV now. Think about it. John Ramsey himself has previously said that the Boulder Police Department botched the case from the beginning. He criticized them for not doing a good enough job over the past 28 years. So, what does it mean for John Ramsey to come out now and praise the new police chief? If the police don't investigate in the direction John wants, what can he do? He can continue to use the media to apply pressure. By appearing on television, emphasizing the DNA technology, he is creating a story that if the police don't pursue, they will be criticized again. What does this mean? If the police focus on DNA as John wants, they may ignore other evidence. If they find nothing with the DNA, the case may be pushed to a dead end again. And most importantly, the Ramsey family can continue to distance themselves from the suspicions surrounding them. Putting pressure on the police may be a way to control the direction of the investigation, to ensure that it follows a path that does not harm the family. Think back to this interview. What did John Ramsey focus on most? He talked about DNA technology. He claimed that genealogical DNA could help find the killer. He called it the most likely way to solve the case. But he did not talk about other important things. He did not mention the unusually long ransom note. He did not mention that the crime scene appeared to be staged. He also did not talk about the family's strange behavior on the night of the murder. If John really wanted to solve the case, why did he not talk about all the evidence? Why focus entirely on DNA? The answer may be that DNA is the easiest way to steer public opinion in a favorable direction. If the public believes that DNA technology can find the killer, they will forget about the other strange details of the case. If the police don't find anything from the DNA, the case goes cold again, and the Ramseys can continue to avoid questioning them. This is a clever tactic, keeping people focused on something you know is unlikely to yield results. What does this mean? If the police don't find anyone from the DNA, John Ramsey can say, "We tried, but it didn't work." If the police come back to the family, he can say, Why waste time when DNA can help us? This could be a way to control how the public views the case. What do you think about this statement? Everything seems to be full of contradictions. I believe that after following this entire analysis, you will also realize the unreasonable points in the story that has lasted for nearly 30 years. Are we getting closer to the truth, or just going in circles? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for taking the time to watch until the end of the video. If you find this content worth pondering, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying you on the journey to find the truth. See you in the next videos.